This is Dr. John Odette. I'm going to be presenting a case today that is one of those cases that you say, come on, man, where everything goes perfectly, but sometimes your instrumentation just doesn't agree with you. So as you can see, this is a LensX laser case. The lens has already been fragmented. The capsulotomy has been made by the LensX laser. I've used a Utrata forceps to remove the capsule. At this point, I'm just doing some basic, what I call my modified phaco chop. I just use a little gentle IA and chop the lens into quadrants. It's already been pre-fragmented for me, so it's relatively easy to chop into pieces. I have my quadrant set to a matrix fragmentation pattern with a couple quadrants already formed. So I'm using very little phaco power here. Mostly it is just irrigation aspiration with some chopping. Occasionally I give a small burst of phaco emulsification to this process. As you can see, everything's going along smoothly. I'm using my chopper very little in this case. This is a relatively soft lens, meaning it's probably about a 2 to 3 plus NS, not a dense lens at all, and since it is already fragmented by the LensX laser, I'm having to use very little power. The majority of the lens comes out very nicely and quickly. As you can see here, I've got my last fragment. This is all real time. And my last fragment comes out very well. I have just some cortex remaining. At this point, the entire bag is intact. I'm using a silicone IA tip made by Alcon. This tip is very capsule friendly the vast majority of the time. I'm just doing some cortical cleanup here. I like to start sub-incisionally. I do not use a bimanual technique. Usually I feel that it's quicker and easier for me to just go forward with this simple silicone IA tip made by Alcon. Now, as I mentioned, I start sub-incisionally. Typically I like to go clockwise in fashion, and that's what I'm doing here. Just cleaning up the residual cortex. It's coming out very nice. Everything looks very clean at this point. We do use aura in this case. I like to do a little capsule polish. That's what I'm doing right here. A little posterior polish. I will then use aura, and eventually I will get into doing some anterior capsule polish. This is a Singer Saffron sweep. I do like to polish the anterior capsule pretty vigorously. You can see all the lens epithelial cells come to the forefront here very clearly. I'm a little bit anal in my methods. I do like to get both the anterior capsule and the posterior capsule as clean as possible. You can see here I'm going through my side port incision, getting the subincisional lens epithelial cells that are adherent to the anterior capsule. At this point I'll actually go back in with my silicone IA tip and just vacuum out some of those lens epithelial cells. Next I will place a little bit more viscoelastic in the eye and insert the lens. In this case I'm placing a Tecnis Toric lens. It goes in very smoothly, no problems here. And finally I will go back in with my IA tip and position the lens accordingly. This lens needs to be positioned at about the 180 position. You can see my markings ahead of time. I like to spin the lens once or twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times in the bag to ensure it is moving smoothly. Here I like to actually remove some of the viscoelastic from behind the lens. So I do that, and then I usually like to spin it another 180 degrees and remove the remaining viscoelastic. At this point, I'm removing some of the viscoelastic, and you can see that I've got my port tip up, and I note striae in the posterior capsule. You can see these striae very clearly in this picture. At this point, I realize that the posterior capsule has been sucked up by the posterior portion of my IA tip. And you can see I'm still on the irrigation. I am trying to get some viscoelastic from my scrub tech. It's not coming out smoothly, so I'm trying to inject a little viscoelastic into the IA tip. But unfortunately, at this point, I realize, oh, I have damaged the posterior capsule. At this point, I have posterior capsular rupture. So I continue injecting viscoelastic and gently and slowly remove my IA tip. I go back in and fill behind this lens with viscoelastic. You can see I've got a small circular to ovoid shaped capsular tear here, and I go back in, gently position the lens since I now have the bag filled with viscoelastic. No vitreous has presented at this point in the case. I position it exactly where I want this. This is a toric lens, so I prefer to keep it in the bag. I did think about positioning this with reverse optic capture. However, I did not want to do that because of the power of the lens. You can see I'm trying to show here the silicone IA tip. With the posterior portion, there is metal showing. I'm not sure how this escaped me. I actually think this happened while I was rotating the lens in the bag because I had previously removed all the viscoelastic without problem. Now I'm just doing some gentle manual irrigation here, removing some of the viscoelastic from the anterior chamber. Since the lens is already in position and there's no vitreous in the anterior chamber, I don't really want to go back in with my irrigation and aspiration handpiece device. I position the lens exactly where it should be, as it is a toric lens case, and then I'll gently hydrate both of the wounds to ensure they are self-sealing wounds, and in this case they seal very nicely. As you can see, I've got a tight wound, and this is the end of the case. This patient did very well in her postoperative period. She saw 2025 post-op day 1 despite the posterior capsule rent. I expect we may have to do a little early YAG capsulotomy, as sometimes patients notice this capsule striae in their center of their visual axis. I hope this case helps demonstrate that despite almost perfect technique, that you can have difficulties in the case due to equipment that is not quite perfectly functioning. So it is very important to maintain close inspection of all of your equipment that you use intraoperatively. Thank you.